Well, welcome back, everybody. Our next speaker is David Lebudzinski. David is a consulting physician at iGetBetter. He's a UMass alumnus, and he went to College of Holy Cross, and he's the alumnus of Holy Cross. Please join me in welcoming David Lebudzinski.
Thank you. We're going to be continuing a very similar theme here. I'm the only physician that works for iGetBetter. We're a small company that provides a very nice platform for helping to maintain the virtual relationship between physician and patient, which is evolving tremendously in this day and age. And I think it's my job, since I work with some really tremendously talented individuals, sometimes to give them a clinical perspective about what the doctor actually wants to see and what he or she doesn't want to see sometimes, to kind of prevent that fire hose of data from coming back from the field. Doctors don't necessarily want to know everything. Usually they have a pretty good idea in mind what they do want to know. But we also use our platform to give a significant measure of control to the patient as well, so that they can invite family members to view their care plan that doctors have assigned to them, and they're in control of who gets to see it and the data that comes back from it. So it's a complicated platform. There's a lot that we do. It's a short period of time, but I'll try to get to some of the highlights. And this was a slide that probably worked better earlier in the afternoon. It's a little complicated. Our CEO from MIT loves this slide. For me, there's a lot going on here. I'm a physician, I don't even use a smartphone. I use a flip phone. Basically, we have a platform that's accessible anywhere the patient can use a browser. So whether it's on a smartphone, whether it's on a PC, laptop, whatever, they can access our system. If they don't have anything, and if we've deployed in places where patients are not IT savvy, we'll give them an iPad mini with which they can access our system. To that iPad or smartphone, if the clinician wants, they can pair a multitude of different devices. As long as they're compatible with a middleware company that's out there called Validic, which allows us to plug in our API into their company, we can get the data and deliver it to the clinician. Everything is cloud-based, as everything seems to be in this day and age. And within 30 seconds of taking a measurement, clinicians can actually see the data. And we've devised our systems that clinicians, similar to Twine, can choose when an alert is triggered. And those patients are brought to the clinician's attention first and foremost. A lot, very similar to a lot of the triple aim themes that occur these days. Our system is designed to improve patient population health, lower costs, engage patients, not only patients, but their family members as well, and ultimately reduce emissions and keep everybody happier, obviously. Our first deployment was at Mass General Hospital. It was really a feasibility study that we did a couple years ago. We enrolled 20 CHF patients, and we tried to keep it simple. They were provided through their Department of Cardiology. Keeping it simple is important for senior citizens in particular. Most of our CHF patients were senior citizens. Simple is good. So they were given this was the kit they received. It was easy. Get up in the morning, use the bathroom, step on the scale. And the only thing that needs to happen is the iPad needs to be in the same room as the scale when you step on the scale. If they do that, the clinician can see the reading within 30 seconds. They don't even have to open the cover to the iPad. The blood pressure cuff, a little more involved. They have to hit the button on the edge of the cuff. The app opens automatically. It's on their arm. They hit the green start button. It inflates automatically, and then you can get the reading within 30 seconds. And then they were asked a couple simple questions. Did you do a little bit of exercise today? And did you take your meds as you were supposed to? And to be honest, patients were deployed. They were asked to use these devices daily for 3 months, continuously, once a day, every day. And I was hoping going into it that we would get maybe 50% of the time that they were enrolled that would use the devices. And then they were given an exit questionnaire. And they all felt that it was easy to use the system. They all thought it was great. And all that's nice and fine and dandy. So they enjoyed using the system and they thought it was easy to learn. And this is one of the nicer slides, which was surprising to me. So for the 12 weeks they were enrolled, not surprising that first week with shiny new toys, they logged in most frequently. But then the cool thing is, weeks 2 through 12, it was sustained. They kept, for 3/4 of the patients, they still logged in every day. In fact, of all the days that they could have logged their data, all the patients throughout the study, 89% of the days they actually logged their data. I was shocked at that, to be honest with you. They had one CHF-related readmission that compared to 23.4%, which was the Mass General normal 30-day rate. Not statistically significant, obviously, with just 20 patients, at least suggestive that it's trending in the right direction. More importantly, 80% of the patients felt their CHF was better controlled as a result of using iGetBetter and following their own data. I mean, with a little bit of education to say, here's why checking your weight makes a difference. That means fluids being retained. And then they can say, hey, okay, I see why it makes a difference. On top of that, if their weight trended up, they knew they were going to get a phone call from the nurse practitioner saying, what have you done? Why are you falling off the rails? After that, and we had success with Mass General, we then moved on to Signature Healthcare, which is Brockton Hospital, basically. And that's a different group of patients. They serve a lower socioeconomic population. They were having problems with a number of patients with 30-day bounce-back admissions. With the new CMS mandates, those were unreimbursed admissions. And they actually chose about 25 patients, not based on clinical severity of their CHF, they chose them based on financial reasons. These patients were kind of training them financially. So most of the time, right after an admission, where they were brought in, they were diuresed, and they were ready to go home, they took our system. You can enroll a patient in our system from the bedside. It takes all of 30 seconds. You give them a scale, blood pressure cuff, show them how to use it. Again, it's very simple. And then they go home. And they have a nurse practitioner who previously was calling all their CHF patients in what's called their Homeward Bound Project every day to see how they were doing. With our system, they don't have to call them every day. They go in, they log in, they see who's triggered an alert for that day. Usually it's about 2 or 3 patients. They need only call those 2 or 3 patients. And they've gone from taking a full-time person half a day to track everybody down to 20 minutes every day on average. And patients have learned that when they go off the rails and they have a little too much salt over the weekend, and on Monday or after a holiday, their weight is 4 pounds higher than it was previously, they know they're going to get a call. They know they're going to get bolus with Lasix, and they've changed their habits. As a result, of all those patients, 25 who were previously problematic, they didn't have, in the year that we've been deployed at Brockton Hospital, not one of those patients had a single CHF-related admission. Not just 30 days, but none. In fact, we met with the CEO in September, and he was kind of joking with us that we kind of cost him about $700,000 or $800,000 of revenue because we wiped out what would have been the reimbursed admissions. But they got a bonus from CMS of over $1.5 million for actually lowering their 30-day readmission rate. So the system more than paid for itself. And more important than that, the patients were home. They weren't bouncing back to the hospital. They were happier. By having family members also involved in the care and seeing if a father or some of the family, whoever you want to invite to see your care plan, was trending in the wrong direction, oftentimes they were proactive and they would call the primary care doctor and say, hey, you need to see my dad or something, even before the patient would want to be willing to go in and be seen, let's put it that way. So the families were involved. Since that time, we've deployed for a number of different conditions. Not just CHF. CHF was first because that's what CMS mandated and it was kind of easy to do. But now we're in different centers for hypertension, diabetes, orthopedic programs, total knee replacements. Hypertrophic cardiomyopathy is one of our newer ones. That's over at the Brigham. Callum McRae came up with a different idea. For these patients, they have big, thick heart walls. It's mostly genetic. And you have to relax the heart and give it time to fill. If the heart beats too fast, you can't fill it and their cardiac output goes down. So when these patients are diagnosed, they want to put them on a regimen of often 2 or 3 different medications designed to slow the heart. The old-fashioned way is you bring them in, you start them at a low dose, you send them home, you bring them back in 2 weeks, you ask them how they felt, did they have any symptoms, increase the medication, send them home, come back, and so forth. It's labor-intensive, it takes a while. I trained at UMass. Patients in Worcester and Central Mass don't like coming into Boston. That's like too complicated for them, it's too expensive. And a lot of them are busy. Some of these hypertrophic cardiomyopathy patients, they have lives. They don't want to be going to the doctors every 2 weeks. And that whole period by the time you get him up to speed and therapeutic, can be like several weeks, several months. So the first patient they enrolled was perfect. He was from the Cape, he was a contractor, he didn't want to come to Boston all the time. They brought him in for the first visit, we enrolled in the program. The doctors just wanted to ask a few things every day as they were ramping up their medication. Do you have any chest pain? Do you have any palpitations? And they qualified it. There was a selection of 5 different answers they could give. Any lightheadedness or dizziness, and they gave him a blood pressure cuff to see what their pressure and heart rate was. And if every 2 or 3 days they didn't have any, horrible symptoms, and their blood pressure was good and the heart rate was good, they would bump up the medication remotely. And so they took what was a 2 or 3 month period to get them therapeutic on the drugs where they want them to be, went down to like 2 or 3 weeks. So, and the patients didn't have to come in. So they were thrilled. And it ended up working out pretty well at this point. That's kind of the way our system is designed. We have a platform with our care plan editor that it's simple to use for the patient. They log in, they choose their own username and password. And with our care plan editor, well, let me just go through here. It's simple. There's an activity section, and that's if someone's on like a PT program, here are the exercises you're supposed to be doing on this particular day, and it rotates depending on when the orthopedist wants you to see certain activities. Week 1, week 2, week 3. Announcements, teaching that can be done here, messages that can go specifically to you, not just globally about CHF and whatever diabetes condition we're talking about, but we've had some patients who, if they're on Coumadin and they like to binge in strawberries in June and their INR goes way off, we've had clinicians say, okay, I know for this patient they need to limit their strawberry intake to 1 cup a day, or whatever it is, 1 cup a week, and they put messages on it like this. With the ease of use of the care plan editor, that's what the clinician can do. So they're not just giving information to the patient, they're giving information that's clinically important. Those strawberries were messing up the INR. They can log their progress, obviously. There's multiple different ways clinicians can choose to get data. They can ask them text questions and get text answers. They can ask simple yes or no questions. They can have slider bars on a scale of 1 to 10, whatever it is they want to ask about nausea or pain. Our orthopedists ask about pain in different ways. What's your pain when you're bending your knee? What's your pain at rest? What's your pain with activity, etc. Whatever the clinician wants to ask, our care plan editor gives them the chance to do it. So they can have, generally speaking, a global care plan that they apply to most patients, but then they can tailor it down to the level of an individual patient. And they can do it at any time. It's not just at the beginning, but any time they can go back in and tweak it. When the clinician logs in, he or she sees in the box on the right what patients have triggered an alert since the last time that you logged in, and then you can go to their data. Stuff that's too high or too low is in red. Again, the parameters are set by the clinician. You can put annotations in there so you can say that on this particular day I increased the patient's Lasix or what have you. And this is kind of the guts of our care plan editor that the clinician can use. It's just a series of cards. And if you click on an individual card, there's the text that you want to show the patient. You can choose the frequency that it appears. You can make a card for anything. These orange cards are activity cards, something you want the patient to do. Blue cards are announcements, something you want to tell the patient. You can put a link in there that you want them to go to a certain web page or to see a certain video you thought would be good for them. And then the purple cards are measurement cards, often tied to a device, but not necessarily. It could be a question that you just ask them, what's your nausea level for today, what have you. And then you choose the parameters that you want to set for normal for that particular patient. And again, from the patient's interface, they can invite other family members to see their care plan and follow their data, and then they can uninvite them at any time that they want as well. Patients in complete control, and they can invite other physicians as well. And they can also communicate with their clinician as well, if it's not urgent, obviously. They can say whatever it is, whatever message they want to send to the clinician, and the clinician can communicate back. So that's a very brief overview of our system. Questions?
Now, the scale is talking to the Bluetooth in the iPad, and that's what it has to be in the same room?
Bluetooth generally doesn't work too well if like the scale is in one room and the iPad is in another. That often the Bluetooth connection doesn't work. So for simple, practical purposes, we tell them to keep the iPad in the same room as the scale. And the iPad has a Verizon wireless signal, so that's how we get the data.
Why can't the tool just upload the data using a Wi-Fi?
That was an initial thought of ours, but our experience is that a lot of patients, especially senior citizens, may not know what their Wi-Fi password is. They are not, I mean, we're dealing with patients who are really sometimes not IT savvy. I mean, we had an issue once where Verizon reset their signals to a different frequency, and all you had to do was turn off the iPad and turn it back on and reset. Just the act of describing that I did over the phone certain patients to find the button on the iPad to turn it off, and some patients were like, well, it's not round, so it's not really a button. I mean, God bless them, but you really do have to keep it very simple. That's why the interface that we showed you, go back, this is not a lot of bells and whistles in the interface. It's very simplistic, but senior citizens in particular like simple. Withings, it works for Withings. Withings is wonderful, and they have a very cool, slick app, and they're a French company, and they changed the look of it with different fashion seasons, literally, I think sometimes, and senior citizens hate that as our experience. To go from a purple interface to a blue one to a red one confuses the crap out of them. They're like, we just want simple. And that's one of my jobs, which is to tell our guys sometimes, keep it simple. Simple is good when you're trying to get information back. For the younger hip generation, a new interface is cool. For the older folks who are not used to iPads and so forth, it's a challenge. So we keep it simple.
Sounds like a lot of work with care plan editor for the clinicians.
Well,
how is that working?
Well, number one, we try to make it easy to use. But number two, generally, most clinicians, once they come up with their own little care plan for CHF, they deploy mostly the same care plan to 95% of the patients. And then they'll tweak it for the rest of the 5% to add a message, subtract a message, or whatever. So they're not overhauling the care plan every time they deploy it. They're just tweaking it here and there, but most patients are getting the same one. They also play into a little bit of the doctor's egos. If you're working for the Brigham, you don't necessarily want to use the same care plan that you use at Mass General or Johns Hopkins. You want your own care plan. It's mostly the same. But they have their own, and once they have their own, that's what they want to deploy, usually, for the majority of patients.
So let's say Brigham cardiology are all deploying the same care plan?
No, they don't have to. Each physician can deploy their own version of their own CHF care plan or orthopedic care plan, whatever they want. That's the beauty of the care plan editor. And so each physician will have their own library. And they could even have orthopedic care plan 1, 2, 3 for total knees, depending on how they want it, whatever slight changes they want to have between them. They can have as many as they want in their library.
My question is regarding user interface. It's all in English. Do you have to put out in Spanish?
Not yet. That would be easy to do. As soon as we have someone who really wants to do it. I mean, we're still an early company, so we're still proving our efficaciousness after the sale. And that's just in English. Once we do that, then we'll happily venture out to other languages. Anyone else?
What do you think wearables will play in the future?
Depending on what the clinician wants, basically. Some clinicians don't want it, and some clinicians do. Some clinicians, the last thing they want is to know how many steps somebody took, because they're like, it depends on what the clinician wants. At the Brigham, for the hypertrophic cardiomyopathy patients, they are giving them a little Withings Pulse O2 to actually figure out how many steps they're taking. They're not using that as their first line of defense as to saying how active they are every day, but just as kind of a global indicator about whether or not their activity may have dropped off. They're using it. It's up to the clinician, basically. And it's a work in progress with the patient. I mean, we've had clinicians say, okay, we won't give you a ton of messages every day, but can you just use the scale every day so we can follow your weight of your CHF patient? And they can have that dialogue back and forth between clinician and patient to say, okay, for this person, that's all we're going to do. So it's up to what the clinician and patient both decide. But most clinicians, I don't think, want a whole lot of data unless they think it's clinically relevant, because they're busy. You don't want to sit through a whole bunch of stuff unless it's going to change the medical management. But they have the option.